Parliament, where we dissect key issues that have happened in the House and what is taking the time of our parliamentarians. And today we want to put our lens on 3 or 4 issues that are happening and are important for the public to have a say in. And one of those will be the human rights issue within the country, the NSSF probe that began, but also the school fees, policy and increment and the narrative around that and where we go as an entity. But to help me have this conversation, I have 3 gentlemen who are not new to us, who have been in this space, but also occupy the spaces within Parliament and within society. And on my far right, I have Kimonges Timothy from Parliament Watch. Welcome to the show, Timothy.
Thank you so much, Tricia, and I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Yes, and next to him, I have a friend and a colleague in this work, Speaker Harris Akampurira. Welcome. Speaker Kawempe.
Yes.
Division.
Republic
of Kawempe.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me. Good morning to our viewers.
You almost took us on that Kawempe Republic thing.
Oh.
And next to him is retired Major Awich Pollar, Director External Services, NRM Secretariat. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, viewers.
And gentlemen, I cannot begin this without, putting a highlight on the general environment of human rights that is happening within the country, but particularly on the issue of missing persons, because it almost feels like it's something that is constantly recoming and re-happening. Earlier this week and last week, the Uganda Human Rights Commission constantly had a conversation around creating a report that will speak to the missing persons. And they said of the 25 that they were asked to deliver, 17 really are detained. And some, they don't know where they are. Of the 25 that are missing, they only have 1 person's national identity number. And so I started to wonder what that speaks for the environment of human rights as it regards to Uganda as an entity. And maybe just to give us a brief of the narrative around the drone pandemic, the sticky politics. We'll just have, your individual take on that subject. I'll begin with you, Major Pollar.
Now, if I frame the issue right from what you have said, is the issue of missing persons, right?
Yeah.
Missing persons is a great concern for the government, for Uganda, and for our party. Because every Ugandan should live free from fear. And even then, when somebody is arrested, among the non-derogatable rights that you can't never ever derogate from is a right to habeas corpus. So if somebody was arrested, if the family went and asked court that it should be brought, it should be brought, because it is a right that you can't deviate from. It's similar, like freedom from slavery, freedom from torture, and right to fair hearing. We can jump around to imagine right to life. Right to life is not part of it, even right to food. Because right to life, competent courts can sentence somebody to death and remove that right. So these 4 rights is really a no-go area. So therefore, that explains the importance that somebody should not be missing. Now, it's a concern. At one time, government wanted a list of names to be presented. We don't know how far that presentation went. But the point now is, do we really know that these people are missing? Like you said, only 1 national ID was there. If they are missing, by who? Because we have called on the state actors that they should make sure the methods of operation, the instruction to officers in the theater, officers who have the mandate to arrest, should be clear. Because if we are not clear, suppose Al-Shabaab also come and with dark glasses and start arresting people on the street with unknown number plate. They may be doing it to blackmail government. Here we are saying we have not arrested, and yet people are complaining. Therefore, it calls upon a clear engagement terms by people who are legally mandated to carry out arrest, so that bad people don't smuggle themselves in. Because as it stands now, we think that the names which are presented are fictitious and ghost names, because government said we don't have them. And as you said, of the 17 or so, only one ID was mentioned. So it's a serious matter that we have to come out clear, both from the engagement rules for the officers who carry out arrest, because any wrong element can get onto the street and arrest. No number plate, putting on dark glasses. Suppose they decided to arrest, to blackmail government and kill. So the issue here is, can we come out clear with our terms of engagement? Two, isn't these names fictitious? If they're genuine names, then we must put our heads together to ensure that the people who are arrested by state, who are mandated to arrest, are brought to law. Not really big. I do not think it is in the interest, and I know it is not in the interest of government, that persons should be missing. Every Ugandan has a right to freedom from fear. Immediately you live in fear, then you're not free. And it's a very, very serious freedom. So that is my take on that.
Yeah.
For the moment.
And maybe also to bring in Harris, because I hear you, but I was watching NTV, and one thing critically spoke to me is that it's easy to tell the stories of the missing persons from the political point of view. But when they brought faces of their families, of their wives, of their children, you start to understand, wait a minute, it can't be that they've been hired to lie. And it can't be that they are lying. So in the presence of missing persons, regardless of whether it was for political reasons or not, in the presence of missing persons, are there mechanisms in which these issues can be investigated? How do we have conclusive investigation into missing persons within Uganda? And not necessarily because they have political linkings, but that it should be the right process in making sure that we come to, a seemingly good end on understanding this person is missing forever, or this happened to them. How do we have this process, not to just give confidence to the people left behind, but to know where these people are?
Yeah, but let me begin by putting a little bit of context to this conversation. As early as the 13th century in British England, that was the year around 1213, the barons were tired of the same situation. The king kidnapping those he perceived as political opponents. And they would disappear, and the families would look for their persons and they couldn't find them. And sometimes people would be hanged and killed without a trial. So the barons said, no, this is barbaric, this is archaic, this is inhuman, it's degrading, it's cruel. We cannot go on with it. As early as the 13th century. So they came up with a document that we now know as the Magna Carta, which is the mother of all constitutions.
All constitutions.
Yes, so all the Bill of Rights that we talk about, they have the roots in the Magna Carta. He's talked about the right to habeas corpus, the writ of habeas corpus. It comes from the Magna Carta. And it was a dissent that there is no one, including the king, who was very powerful at the time, who should have arbitrary powers, especially powers to make people disappear arbitrarily. Now, this is the 21st century now.
Quite
all over the world, everyone talks about human rights. And then you have people, and let's be honest, people who have disappeared, all of them are members of the National Unity Platform. There is no person who has disappeared from the face of this country, Uganda, who is not a member of the National Unity Platform. And the disappearance began at the inception of the 2021
elections.
Uganda national elections. We have members of our party or who associate with us who have been missing for more than 2 years now. And their families have come out clearly. We have been consistent for over that period. And we have been saying, these people, where are our supporters? They were picked at this time from Lugala, from Kasubi, from Munaku, we know these spaces from Busega. We mentioned them. And we said they have been picked. We don't know where they are. Can you please produce them? Time goes on, and the trend continues. And my senior brother says that maybe it could be fictitious. Let me tell you, it is not fictitious. How do I know? I know it is not fictitious because, number one, like I've said, and like everyone, every Ugandan knows, they are members of the families who have come out to say, my people are missing. Number two, as recent as just 2 weeks ago, one of the bodyguards of His Excellency Robert Kyagulanyi was kidnapped on Maya Road by a drone.
Is that Bobby Young?
Yes, Bobby Young was kidnapped on Maya Road. And 8 days later of being held in Communicado, he's produced in court-martial. He's not the only one. We could talk about Motive Kasaga. I could mention 10 names of the members of the National Unity Platform who have been kidnapped. And after putting political pressure, these people are produced in court-martial. So is it related to these other ones who have disappeared? Yes, they are related. The trend is exactly the same. People were kidnapped. Were they being kidnapped? Political opponents. So this is a spate, or we are going through a spell of what we call a crisis of legitimacy, that the government of Mr. Museveni clearly suffers from legitimacy. We are in a crisis of legitimacy. They know they did not win the election. They know they are not the legitimate power holders of the will of the people of Uganda. And you could see that on the kind of military presence from elections. And every street of Kampala, every street of urban areas, even as far as rural areas, you had military operation. You could think that, for some moment, you would think that maybe we are under some guerrilla operation. So the 2021 elections were not elections per se. It was a military operation. And we have never recovered from it. Even when they, usurped the powers and took over the power illegitimately, they have never been comfortable. So they live in fear. They are in government, but still they live in fear. It is like when you are, when you have stolen something, if you've ever stolen something, even if it is sugar or something, you have committed an offense. Your mind, the state of your mind is that someone knows you have stolen. You're guilty. Your conscience tells you you're guilty. So we have a government run by a group of men and women whose conscience tells them, look here, we have committed so many offenses.
And when you say that, a lot of that conversation for me stands in, the lack of accountability that is going on. And that is where I want Timothy to help us. Because there was a time when, citizens, had a spur over people being taken into safe houses. We had the close of Nalfenya. And different entities, parliamentarians went and visited these places. Even while they were refused to enter, we knew that something was being done. Fast forward, a lot of Ugandans are missing. And it almost now is a contradiction of, are they really missing? Do we have really missing people? Or these are falsehoods towards the government? But the question of urgency for me is on accountability. Like Afande Pollar said, do we need accountability from the state operatives to tell us this is who we have, this is who we don't have, these are the operating entities they are in, they've either been detained, arraigned, or they're in jail. Do we need to come to that point for us to have a little bit of confidence for the Ugandans?
So, Tricia, thank you. And just to emphasize that we need it urgently. really, as far as accountability of the same is concerned, human rights. As we stand today, and the human rights conversation, we've had it over and over.
Exactly.
It's something that you make 2 steps ahead and make
Like 3
like 5.
steps. Yes.
So it's a process that is not very interesting to be in. But also, I think that in this conversation, the state has a high responsibility. It is the Constitution that charges them with the mandate to protect the property and the lives of its citizens. And if there are concerns that there are a number of people missing, actually, ours is to support them towards the realization of creating sanity about in the same concerns. But also, I think I have a very big challenge with those who are charged with the mandate of enforcing these rights. They seem not to appreciate well how this should be conducted, because you find how the security agencies conduct themselves in the manner of enforcing, but also ensuring that these rights are upheld, they are protected. It is a total, like I was watching a video recently in the court martial.
Yeah.
One of the suspects was trying to express himself. The next thing I see is like he had been
holding him by the neck. Yes.
No, it was strangled.
It was, and it
Because in the background you can hear someone say, "Don't strangle him."
Yeah, don't strangle him. And yet it's a matter that there are other better ways to be handled. So you realize that there is a sense in which those who are charged with this mandate, there are better ways of handling this. But also, just to emphasize, is that the rights that we are talking about, these are matters which have both been pronounced by court, also Parliament, the institution has given its position, but we keep moving on and on and on. And so I think that I think for me, from the Parliament perspective, is to continue demanding for better accountability, for ensuring that the rights, even Parliament as it's charged with the mandate of budgeting and ensuring that it divides the cake. I think one of the requirements should be a human rights issue. At a time T, we had gender being a very, very critical issue. What happened? They introduced the aspect of a certificate of the gender, certificate of gender compliance. That these days, a ministry or a vote before as the budget is being presented,
you have to have a gender compliance certificate.
We've at a point, environment now is becoming a very, very key issue. And you've seen that the introduction of a certificate of environmental compliance is an item that is being introduced. I think that the aspect of human rights is becoming a pandemic in its own, not just because of the understanding, but also because how it's being handled. So, and it's something that we think that, especially from the perspective of Parliament, I think we can look at it overall, but looking at it specifically in Parliament, they are charged with a mandate. I think that it's unfair to continue financing the abuse of human rights. That should not be happening. I think that even as you give out the money, there should be some sort of accountability. That sort of accountability in terms of how you've done, where you are, and why you've not been able to do that. Even within the other mandates of Parliament.
Before we go to another session, I want to respond to my brother's assertion here. This young brother asserts 2 things. One, he asserts that the election was not won. 2, he asserts that we government were living in fear. I just want to correct that error by saying no, election was duly conducted, and even there was an exhaustion in the Supreme Court, where if you felt you have evidence, you'd come. Somebody wanted to come, he found he had no evidence, they abandoned it. So election, and the observers were there to see, they expressed their views, but over and above, it was a fair election, we won. Now, about fear, we are now on the program of Parliament Watch. You can't fear when you have such a majority in Parliament. we are over and above majority in parliament and election also. So there's no fear from us as government. Our only worry now is to tackle the task in the social contract that we made with the people. We promised the people A, B, C, D, and years are running, and we are running to complete that. So I just wanted to correct those two.
Tricia, if you allow me, please, I would like to appeal to my senior brother to his in three regards. I want to appeal to him as a citizen. Number two, as the member of the NRM. Number three, as the former UPDF officer. You see, as citizens as a political community of a certain landmass called Uganda, we signed the social contract that is expressed in the form of a constitution. And the constitution promises that everyone shall be protected by that constitution. And so everything, every sacrifice I make or any other Uganda makes it under that constitutional promise that we are equal under the constitution and that everyone under that constitution is protected. So when you have people who are disappearing, when you have the law say that if a person commits a crime, this is the procedure of arresting them and bringing them before the courts. But the state systematically decides to depart from the constitution, and it now resorts to bush-like methods of work, drones, men who are not in. They are clearly operating outside the constitution. So they are outside the constitution. Now, once you have a government which has now departed from the constitution, that is a very, very dangerous example for the country. Because if your government, if it is a government that is for the people anyway, if a state departs from the constitution, why should citizens then respect the constitution? And I think that you and I, everyone here on this panel, should be worried. Because outside the constitution, there is chaos, there is social disorder, there is anarchy. And for me, I worry that even the members of the NRM should be worried that once the greatest majority of people who feel offended also said, okay, we are going to operate outside the constitution, there's going to be no country called Uganda. And that is the last thing anyone would wish for. And I can assure you that we don't have enough military officers, we don't have enough police officers to man the home of everyone. So while we sit here on the television and speak, I want to challenge the NRM members to speak up against the human rights abuses. Because if my colleague, my brother, Bob Duyang, Motive Kasaga, Jamshid Kavuma, are arrested using drones clearly outside the purview of the law, why should I continue to respect the law? Those families whose members have been taken away, why should they still uphold that constitution? And if they know a person who is operating outside the constitution, what stops them from also engaging them within their means? Of course, that would breed the anarchy that I'm talking about. And that's why I implore everyone that for as long as the constitution doesn't hold tight, there is no one who is safe.
That's true. And maybe on that point, I want to bring Pollar in. The government met with top officials from the opposition 2 days back. And they were talking about, the abductions and the missing persons. And in the words of Prime Minister Nabaye, she said that there is a section of the criminals, of the missing persons that are hardcore criminals, and some have been since charged by the courts of law. But before that meeting, we had seen a section of some of the members in the military court. And they were trying to, make a case for themselves. I think one of the gentlemen that was pulled was making a case of why he was arrested. But also Bobby Young was arraigned before the military court. And the juxtapox is where we are speaking of courts of law. To think that a lot of civilians have now started to come into the military court system is something that we need to interrogate deeper on, how far that then goes in ensuring justice is delivered. But also the other critical thing I wanted you to help me, because you've been a serving officer, is, the jurisdiction that the military has in trying civilians in martial courts.
On the aspect of court martials, I think it's an area of technicality and an area of legality, because people seem to hold different views. I had said that the military is quite competent in its human resourcing as far as legal is concerned, because there's a whole chieftaincy of legal department. It's a chieftaincy. In it, there's a directorate of prosecution, which is, so to say, DPP in courts. Now, these are I know my friends who are heading that department, they're very competent. We're with them in law school in Makere. Now, the understanding of the law to some people is that when you are caught in the specific provisions of the law, either heading with a personnel, army personnel, or in possession of military stores, or such offenses that are ordinarily service offenses, but they're clearly mentioned out, then you can be taken to the court. I'm also aware about pronouncement by Constitutional Court over that. So, the Attorney General, where defense falls, should be in a better position to know whether those matters are still on appeal, meaning therefore that we still interpret the law as it is until it is disposed of to them. Although some people will say until it is overturned, we go with the ruling that is. Until overturned, that should be the position. So, the matters of people appearing before military courts is a gray area of different legal interpretations. And the funny thing with the legal interpretations is that once somebody gets to court, the only remedy is appeal, because laws are not interpreted outside court. So until it will crystallize and we know the legal position, I think the country will keep on grappling with this scenario. Because if I am a state and I understand the law like this, and I take you to court, even if my understanding of the law is wrong, the only remedy is to appeal against it. So I just pray that if there is an appellate position that Attorney General is pursuing, it should be exhausted quickly, so that we know the legal position of this provision, so that we don't keep grappling with it forever.
Actually, let us be very clear on the legality, Awich. The Constitutional Court 2 times has come out clearly and interpreted the Constitution. And its interpretation is that the court-martial is not a court of judicature as envisaged under Article 129 of the Constitution. And by effect, it outlawed the provisions of the UPDF Act as amended in 2005 that empowered the court-martial to try civilians. And that was the appeal case is talking about, is the petition by Honorable Michael Kabawiziguruka when he was charged under court-martial for treason case. He won the case. The Constitutional Court declared the trial unconstitutional. Yes, Attorney General went ahead and appealed. But the legal standard is that once there is an appeal, then the position of the High Court stands, or the Constitutional Court stands until the appeal is decided. Meaning that even if we go by his argument, it means that the standard would be they shouldn't be tried in the court-martial until the Supreme Court has declared itself on the matter. Secondly, there is a second case that has been decided just recent at the end of 2022. And the court said, once again, by a vote of 3-2 justices, that trial of civilians in the court-martial is unconstitutional. That is the position. And weeks after, you have NUP supporters being arraigned in the court-martial. Is this a gray area, as my brother says?
It is, because
is it a lacuna in the law?
It
is not a lacuna. For me, I say this is a deliberate government abuse of the law, weaponizing the law and institutions of justice, institutions of criminal justice, using them for political ends.
No, me, I still insist it's a gray area, because what we are discussing is a matter of fact and a matter of law. For example, we don't even, personally, I don't have competent facts in the two cases that you are saying. Okay? I don't have competent facts in the two cases that you are saying. And also in the matters of law, I don't even know exactly where it has reached. So, based on what you are telling me,
that the Constitutional Court has been clear.
You are telling me that is it.
You haven't read the case. I have read the case. And the Constitutional case has said it's unconstitutional.
So me, what I'm saying is that as a general rule, even before these matters went to Constitutional Court, it was a question of interpreting the law. And as I say, a police officer who arrests anybody, or any arresting officer who arrests you, whether it's wrong in law, and once you're already in the criminal justice procedures, the only remedy is appeal. So I pray that it is exhausted and we know the position of the law. Back to the other subclause of your question, you still pointed out the question of missing persons. Missing persons, the situation as it is now is like we are going against the legal principle of he who alleges has the burden to prove. Because right now, what our colleagues do is to simply lay claim to government. Somebody comes and said 200 is missing. So you government prove that they are not missing. It works against the principle. The principle is he who alleges should prove. But now it is working the other way around, that anybody wakes up and said 300 is missing. Prove to us where they are. How do I? So how does it work then? But I can clearly say that part of why NRA, particularly UPDF, doesn't want to believe in that. I have been in UPDF when it was NRA. It's a revolutionary army. It's a pro-people army. This is an army which has not been known to do such things to civilians. In fact, our original code of conduct was so hard that people said we should be flexible. For example, many of it were soldiers who do such things were punishable by death.
That's why I was so shocked.
Yeah, we are punishable by firing squad, actually. So that's why some of us here, this is 200 missing.
It has
come on.
changed ever since you left.
It's like, come on, are you talking about the army that I participated in its foundation?
Yes, the army you participated
that's not
in.
True.
The face of the army you participated in, that you diligently served. It is a shame that it has changed, that it has since ceased to be an army that protects the integrity of the country called Uganda, to an army that goes on the streets of Kampala intimidating political opposition supporters, an army that changes clothes and puts on civilian attires armed with their guns and kidnapping NUP supporters. Of course, I sympathize with you, my senior brother, that all your sacrifices are not reflected in the continuity of that institution.
No,
and of course, I hear your pain.
Let me hear from you.
No,
let me pose a pause on the military, and then go into the report that is coming from this meeting with the opposition and government and the security agencies. Honorable Tayewa said Prime Minister Nabaye has to deliver a report to Parliament on the investigations they've done on missing persons and what they've found out, the conclusions of the findings. But also leader of opposition, Honorable Matthias Poga, said in the event that Parliament, that the government doesn't bring that report, they'll have a shadow report. But in this conversation, one thing, and I think Afande Awich alluded to it, that he who alleges must prove. In the report that, the leader opposition desires to bring, do we imagine that there'll be, evidence, spots, and a narrative of which people are missing, where they were missing from, and how do we go forward from there?
So just maybe to highlight on the principle, he who alleges must prove. There are exceptions to that.
Exactly.
And one of those would be when a defense of an alibi is raised. Once it's that a defense of alibi, and that is it's used most times when you're placed, when say someone accuses you of you in a specific place, and then you raise, no, I was not there. You deny. Once you raise that, the burden shifts. So those are just some of the exceptional circumstances to the general rule. And I think just to give it context in the conversation is that the opposition are raising concern. I think our people are missing. I think while it's true that they should go ahead and prove and give substantial information, I think there is a burden on the state to equally pick up.
Because these are your citizens.
You see, the state is charged with the mandate to protect.
Yes.
Actually, we don't even need 200 or 100 to get lost or to
Need one person.
We just need one person for it to cause the
state to act.
But just prove to the question that you asked is that this whole conversation within Parliament and the Deputy Speaker and the government, the government side and the opposition meeting, has a bit of a history, and that is we've seen even just at the start of the 11th Parliament. Of course, there are other matters that had been handled in the previous parliaments. After elections, we saw concerns and about the disappearance of the people. We see the leader of opposition presented a number of names. I think the demand has since increases that as you present the name, please put the phone contact and all the other details that are being requested. But so subsequently, you've seen Honorable Zaki also raising using alternative ways to make his point. An issue that caused a lot of conversation within the House, and even it is moving towards the change of the rules of procedure. So that actually culminated to the leader of opposition actually making a formal complaint, and it tabled equally names and for the disappearance. And the Deputy Speaker then requested that I think we need to have a meeting both on the government side and the opposition, which was supposed to happen towards the end of the year last year, but I think because of some issues it didn't happen. So that happened this week. The output for the meeting was that the Prime Minister was to give an update on the concerns which the oppositions were raising. However, I think that the opposition requested for time so that they can give a response to the statement, and so the Speaker deferred to the next 2 weeks. Next 2 weeks because Parliament has gone on recess of 2 weeks. So then that means the statement can only come
after 2
weeks. Probably as the first priority matter. So we've also seen conversations about the same statement being presented. I think that I saw the Prime Minister giving an interview on the same, but also raising concern that many of the people being on the list, either they're affiliated to crime and some of these other things. But for me, I think the army, the NRA that Afande Awich is saying, I think it's something which is good, and many of us who would want sometimes to believe and really accept that, we are a bit disappointed to the fact that when concerns are raised, the next thing we see is people who have been tortured, people who are limping, people who have lost some of their body parts, and really they're experiencing what would require torture. So while you would want to believe that we have a professional army, we have people who are very, very sensitive to human rights. Sometimes what we see is absolutely different. And you say if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it must be
it
a
is
duck.
a duck.
So, and that is if you have a preaching and an ideology that we are professional, but whatever is being practiced is something totally different. And so, back to Parliament, I think last week we saw the Namuganza, the minister, being sanctioned. I think these are the same effort what we were discussing here last time should be applied here
to this issue.
It is a matter, and I know that sometimes the concern which Gafanda which is raising probably could be true, that you just raise concern. Actually, you if someone has disappeared, usually say he's dead, so that the state can come out clear and give an explanation of what because
happened.
But also that's an approach. If it's indeed it's happening, it's an approach to respond to the way the state is dealing with human rights, because there should be accountability. We have clear procedures of you should go and arrest people. You should identify yourself. There is a clear procedure.
You should read the person, their rights, and then take them.
Yeah, and I would imagine actually these procedures are given to our officers, and they should practice. But they're simple things. If you see, you wonder what's happening. Like just the incident of the arrest of the suspect in the court martial. You don't need to strangle. In a sensible setting.
Imagine if that happens in court. This is a courtroom. Someone is being strangled by prison officers and military officers. In courtroom, then what happens when they are in cells?
No camera.
Yeah, and my brother, I just wanted to show you this and show our viewers. You see, this is Damulira John. He disappeared on the 20th day of December 2020. That was before elections. And if you follow our communications as the National Unity Platform, you can say that for the past 2 years, we have been consistently asking for him and many other people. So for me, I would like to ask people who speak on behalf of government and the NRM party, when we speak on platforms like these ones, we need to be a little bit sensitive to such families, because the families are actually there. And every time they have said, okay, pronounce them, we have actually brought to them, to the media, and the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister has the report, even if it is their contacts, even if it is family members, even if it is on the day on which they were kidnapped, all that information is there. And for me, what all this brings me to is that these are supposed to be non-negotiables. That in this country, in this age and era, we still have people disappearing arbitrarily. I think that as a generation, as a nation, this should be a non-negotiable value, no matter which political party you support. But this is not a partisan issue. This is a human rights issue. This is a national matter. And I can assure you, even Awich, in his consciousness, the party he supports, he doesn't want his party to be the one that is making people disappear. And that's why I challenge the NRM supporters, young people especially in the NRM, I want to complete my statement. I challenge them. Speak up. I want to see a procession organized by NRM supporters saying, no, we disagree with the National Unity Platform, but we respect their rights to liberty, their right to a fair trial, their right to life. I want to see that. And that once we start feeling each other's pain, no matter our political inclinations, that's when we can start calling ourselves a nation. But for as long as for one political party to exist, another must die, members of another party must perish, then that is not a nation.
I thought you are finding yourself into managing our time, because it looks like we have emotions to this. So when we talk, we fail to regulate our minutes. So we should be fair to you to make your work easy. But I just want to respond to what Brother Kimonges said, and also what you said. My response to Kimonges is that, like, you talk of sensitivity when we talk. When we make sessions like when we talk about this, then people who appear with signs of torture and the like. You see, we are talking to the whole world. So if we could save ourselves, since we have the facts, we say in the case of so and so who appear. Otherwise, we talk in a minibus way without justifying our cases. We are actually risking the country to the world. So I would beg that we do that. For example, if you are talking of Kakwenza, that is it, or something. So I pray that we give specifications so that we don't talk in a minibus, because we are really talking to the world about our country. Now, about the families that we should be sensitive to, it is the same thing also, that if we are making claims, as I still insist, we are well aware about the exception to the rule, that if somebody simply comes and lays a claim to, even if you in your individual capacity, somebody comes to your door and said, my children have disappeared, and you know you are the one who made them disappear, you prove. You just come to my door and tell me, my children have disappeared. We know you. Prove that you have not taken them. So, please show that on such and such a day I took your daughter or your son and I was seen with it here and there. So, but the current thing I still insist is this minibus claim of bringing an minibus claim against government. 17, 20, I think the list was even 100, wasn't it? The one which was presented to Parliament.
The first one.
The first list.
Yes. So you say the government, 200 people are missing. Tell us. He who alleges must prove, I insist. So the sensitivity is also to the effect that if we keep just making a minibus claim to the world, we are really, really, remember we are all this in like a saucepan, this saucepan called Uganda. So if you damage it out there, you are done in the same saucepan you are in. So it's the same sensitivity. We are talking about the families who feel affected, who feel aggrieved. But I insist that part of why, for us in the army who knew what it is and know what it is, can't believe it, because it is way outside our norms. Especially when we're talking 200, that 200 people seem to get missing in Uganda, in the arms of the army.
Maybe I find Awich on that note, and maybe also to wind out this conversation. What I hear all of you say is critical for us to interrogate if citizens of Uganda are missing, and that needs to be the concern of the state. Outside that, outside political colors, outside the work of the military, we need to have urgency in making sure that we find out where these people are and why has it taken us this long to actually address missing persons cases within Uganda.
If they ever went missing anyway.
That is why I think the investigation is important.
Did they miss? And if they're missing, where are they? Because some of us believe that in the first place, there are no big numbers missing. They are just claims brought with an intention.
And I hear you.
So otherwise, we'll investigate the ghost missing. Where do you get a ghost who is missing?
I think the narrative around investigation is that you can come to the conclusion, a relevant conclusion, to say, in all that we've investigated, X, B, Y really are either dead or left the country, or this happened to them. So that we don't dismiss before we have, you know, a clear interrogated process that has happened. But I want us to leave, you know, the conversation around missing parts, because it's quite sticky and it can drag on for a while, and go to the business of parliament that has been happening this week. The select committee led by Honorable Mwine Mpaka began its investigations into the NSSF. And as a fund, if you look at the numbers of NSSF, it is a fund that is working and it's doing well. But we find ourselves in a point where its management is under scrutiny, and there are a lot of, you know, sticky points that have been highlighted. I think one clip that really moved was of John Mutua, who was alleging that, you know, one of the board members appointed himself and his girlfriends. And so in the interrogation of the entity NSSF, there are a little bit of nitty-gritties that have caught us off-site. But to help us understand that, I want Kimonges to come in first to, you know, give us a scope of the work that that committee has been able to accomplish within its within the first few days that has been sitting?
So first, I must say that I think it's a good place we are in. Conversation is going on. There is demand for accountability, and there is since the workers are understanding what's going on, which is very good. Number two, the origin of where we find ourselves today is that it's really it's the 6 billion saga, but I think there are many other things that embodies that. So when the matter came up, the members raised concern, and the speaker instituted a select committee. And the select committee is one of the many committees that we have in Parliament that enable Parliament to work, because Parliament also operates largely and does its work within the committee level. And so a select committee was set up, which is chaired by Mwine Mpaka, to look into this matter. Today they are concluding their interface with the different individuals regarding the same, and after they'll be able to prepare a report and submit. But so far, what we've been able to see is that there's a bit of everyone is speaking from their angle. But what seems to be clear is that there is 6 billion shillings, which how it was supposed to be spent, who was requesting for it is very unclear. We shall wait for the report of the committee, so that it gives us more clarity on the way forward. But regarding the money NSSF, it's good to emphasize that these workers' money. From where I read and I look at the board of NSSF, I think that it's a very professional. I know some of the individuals there, and from how I know them and how I look at them, I think that they're very professional. And listening to what they submitted before the committee in terms of the money that had been accounted, who requested for it, how it was supposed to be spent, it's very unclear. The minister who is the line minister is the Minister of Gender, Honorable Betty Amongi, has also given her side of the story. We are waiting for a report, but also it's just to emphasize that workers' money must always be protected. But also when we look at what's happening at NSSF, I think it's also fair to look at it at a broader level. The same issues are facing very, very many other entities, including what we just discussed, the human rights, the human rights issue. It's under the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. The aspect of accountability, the aspect of transparency, and the demand for the same from the citizens. It seems to be cutting across, and it's a very, very uncomfortable discussion, especially for those who are on the other side of the responsibility. And so it's good to say that last time we were here, and one of the colleagues was suggesting that we should have a comprehensive look at what's happening, because this is a huge fund. It's a fund of 17.9 trillion shillings, which accounts to almost 39% of our total budget. If well used, if well utilized in terms of the economic growth of our country, we can go very far.
And maybe also to bring you in, one thing that it took a lot of Ugandans aback was the fact that the workers' house land title is missing. But also in that conversation, there was talk of the pension house, the delays in finishing the pension house. And then I imagine that a lot of these parastatals are audited by the Auditor General constantly. How are there mishaps that we miss on a constant and only see when we do critical analysis of a particular entity?
I just would like to add my voice, start by adding my voice to my brother Timothy's voice on the importance of the NSSF fund. First of all, its size and its potential in stimulating the growth of this economy. And when you look at examples of such funds, especially in the Asian tigers and some African countries that have made good use Singapore. Of it. So it's a huge potential for the country, and yet, just like many other parastatals and other government projects, it is grossly mismanaged, both at the strategic level as well as the operational level. For example, in terms of operational level, you have projects that kick off, and that's your question, but never start, and then you question the conceptualization of these projects. We talk about the Temangalo. You remember that scandal? 2004, it has never been completed.
Sure.
When you talk about the pension house, it is for 2006. It has never been completed. Then you have the Lobowa Estates project, where the number of units that are supposed to be constructed are supposed to be 2,000, but only 200 have been completed. And of 200, only 2 units have been. Only 2 units are committed for occupation. They have not been bought, so no single unit has been bought. So you have huge sums of money being invested and strategically. Then you're there, and then you have a report coming up of land that is supposed to be bought from Madvan Group. The group says we are selling land at 185 billion. And then the government valuer goes in and says, all right, we value this land as 220 billion. But NSSF board is willing to buy at 400 billion.
Interesting.
So this is a microcosm to the bigger Ugandan crisis, that we operate the economy and the country based on corruption, on mismanagement and tokenism. I'm holding a budget here, the operational budget of NSSF for 2022-2023. And when you look at money that goes to staff eating their food, 11 billion. And then when you go this side, where there is activities for expanding social security coverage, according to UBO statistics, we have a working population of 15 million. Ordinarily, if things were working well, all these 15 million should be saving. But subscribers of NSSF are only 1.2. Of 1.2, the active savers with NSSF is only about 600. And then, on one hand, instead of having a group of, the board and the staff well paid at NSSF, they're among the best paid in the country, thinking and strategizing on how do we expand the fund to cover as many people as possible, they have allocated 6 billion for a nationwide activity of expanding the fund and bringing in a lot of money. And then you have 10 billion allocated for just eating.
The just a box. And I hear you when you say that 11 billion is going to eating and stuff, and 6 billion
is for a
nationwide activity.
So this is the crisis that we find ourselves in as a country. And I think that we are going to stagnate for as long as we don't have a change of leadership. And I'm thankful that the 6 billion came up, because when you look at the narrative that the line minister gives, is like, it's important that we push for compliance among workers, but then also sensitize them, create online channels for them to be able to join the fund. And in concepts, it makes sense. But in between this conversation, there is a person that needs to be, an area that needs to be interrogated, where a sitting board sits with a general to discuss NSSF. And seemingly in the hype of things. Yes, General Salim Saleh. And in the hype of things, it is relevant to interrogate why it is important to understand why the board needs, the say and the input of a general
in matters of running a national entity. And that is where I want to task you. I task you, Afanda Awich, to help us, understand the narrative thereof. Because even in the committee calling, I have not yet heard of a committee calling General Salim Saleh to understand his leadership in the whole equation.
Well, I think I have interfaced with Saleh a number of times, and I can pretty guess the window he comes in. But I also like to emphasize the fact that that fund ideally is meant to keep Ugandans when they are at their weak edges. When it's no longer working, when it's old, when it needs to, his earnings are reduced in terms of salary or allowances, that is what should settle in. And if these funds were well managed, our elders are well looked after retirement, it also acts against corruption. Because if you are sure of what will keep you at your old age, you don't need to struggle to be corrupt. You don't need to struggle. I have said here and again that a professor friend of mine in Germany says for him, whatever life he was leading since graduation, he will lead till death. I asked him why. He said, our social security system works because we save, and then when I'm old, I know where to retire to. So it is good that we pay this attention to this. It has a lot of higher multiplier savings to a country, including corruption, as I've said. Now, on the specific question on the interface of Saleh, Saleh is a presidential advisor. And Saleh is a person who likes to share his views, even when it is non-binding. He has met all sorts of people, including musicians, just to give them his views. So, he always likes to share views on any topical issue. I know for a fact that he's based in Kapeka. In Kapeka, is actually his core activity there is production. He's producing bags, these traveling bags. We have to go at the airport, shoes, computers. He's producing computers. He's producing Kapeka. You better visit it yourself. So these other things that come up is where he wants to express his views. And he tells you it is a view. For example, we met him as secretary. He told secretary, said, SG, you are the boss. I'm just giving you my view, what I think should, in my opinion. And he even tells you, SG, I mean, Japan was a very strong man as a SG. Should be strong as that. So Saleh just gives his opinion. And I repeat, even to musicians. So I don't find it strange that he hears a topical issue like NSSF, then he says his opinion or advises. Now, because of his status, when he invites you, you will go. And when you go, you'll take tea or eat lunch. I've ever eaten it myself there. But also, he will always want you to tour the production activity, because he really wants Ugandan to be engaged in production. And that is his core activity there. The rest are just expressing his views. So, clearly, I think knowing Saleh that his views is just, his position is just that, much as he's a presidential advisor on security, he likes sharing his views with people and advising where you take it or leave it. And he does it even to musicians. I wouldn't be surprised tomorrow if he calls traditional healers or witch doctors and he shares his views. So that is what he does.
Oh, interesting.
I think that General Saleh, to the extent that he advises musicians in their independent capacities as private citizens or as private musicians, it is his right, provided he has not coerced them. They have gone there willingly. Anyone who thinks that Saleh has advice to offer, they should go there. But we are talking about a workers' fund that is established under a statute that is governed by clearly stipulated laws. And I don't see under which mandate Saleh can summon the team at the board at NSSF to go and advise them. However good his advice, however non-binding his advice might be, but
by the way, sorry, not sometimes it doesn't summon them. Sometimes they request to meet him. So we need to look at the facts. Did he summon them or did he ask to meet them?
But when you look
Sometimes
at
like in our case, we are the one who asked to meet him.
When you look at because for you, it's
understandable. So we look at the specific of the fact.
Yes, but when you look at for example, you look at the letter written by the minister, Beta Mom, you clearly see that it had an implication. It had an effect on a decision she was going to make, on the decision that the board made, which means that the meeting with General Salim Saleh had with the board had far-reaching implications. So the question we ask, is it a legitimate use of his power as a presidential advisor? And do we see informality actually taking over the fund? And therefore, do you wonder, therefore, that you have the board willing to buy land, which the seller is selling at 185 billion, but the board says 400. You have projects like Temangaro, you have all these projects which don't get to completion. You have a fund that has stagnated. As critical, as significant as it is to the stimulation of growth of the economy as it is, the fund has stagnated. Then when we look around the modus operandi of the board and we see Saleh, next time you will see another officer, then we understand therefore why the fund is stagnating. Because I don't think that there is a monopoly of knowledge, that is special kind of knowledge that Salim Saleh was offering the board that you do not ordinarily find within the legally established structures. First of all, the managing director is expected to be of certain competencies. The board is, comprised of representative of workers groups according to the law. So you expect that it is a self-contained body, and even when it is supposed to do what we call benchmarking, then that benchmarking should be within the legal framework of the board and not informal. So when informality is coming, and on one side, and on the other end, we see that the fund is not performing the expectation, then we have all the reasons to worry. And this brings me lastly to your point. Those you say that it is performing well. I think that is. I think that for me, I wouldn't agree. Well, if your judgment is based on the success of many. No,
I think accumulatively, where we began from the numbers of NSSF. That have tripled, and the estimate is that the fund will grow constantly. In the next 2 years, will grow into, into its perceived growth.
I hear you. I hear you. I see where you're coming from. But my point is, given the potential of that fund,
exactly,
and given the lessons we pick from, for example, Singapore, then it has underwhelmingly performed. It should be way ahead of where it is
I hear
right
you.
now. Yes.
And I'm going to take a short break right now, and then we return and end this conversation with the school education policy. Thank you, gentlemen.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back. Don't forget to like, to subscribe, and to leave a comment so that we have these conversations going on even in the gallery. And to now go into where we are as a country right now, students are planning to go back to school. The results were launched in State House, and we saw that the students didn't really perform as much, and rightly so, because we're coming out of a 2-year pandemic. But also that also, brings us into the conversation on interrogating whether we need to deal with, what our curriculum looks like. And I know when the senior threes go back into school, there'll be, and many schools have charged a cap on the new curriculum. But on that entity around it, the conversation that is happening is on the school fees policy within Uganda. Is education still affordable for Ugandans as a whole?
So thank you so much, Tricia. And it's true that students are going back to school, but also to give it a perspective of our education system, both in terms of affordability, the quality, and its accessibility to majority of the people. It's a broad conversation.
Yeah.
This week, there was a debate in Parliament regarding the cost of fees, and this was had been raised by Honorable Sarah Opendi, together with Honorable Samuel Opio, is a member of Parliament from Kole. And their concern is that there seems to be schools which are exorbitantly charging fees, notwithstanding the affordability of the same by many parents. We've just come from COVID, but also generally the cost is a big issue. We've seen the head of state is been his position as it's good to have education for all, as opposed to having it for a few. But I think that we have to look at elements to do with our UPE first of all. In the recent results, you saw that many of the people who didn't perform well were largely from
the UPE schools.
It begs a question of the quality of the teaching in terms of the teachers, facilitation. Also, that also raises the issue of funding. They are poorly funded. Our teachers are not very well motivated towards. Also, there is less accountability on that. I was seeing the Auditor General's report for the year ending 2020.
2022.
Yeah, the recent one, which was presented to the speaker. The number of the Auditor General raises concern about the payment of ghost teachers. Actually, if you look at the report, it says that there are up to a number of teachers. The amount went to 1 billion.
Wow.
Of the ghost teachers and what have you. But also, that's not just for the teachers. I think it's a general issue. And so the report which the House considered was a bit insufficient, and so the speaker returned back to the committee. The concern there was that the report seemed to focus more on urban setting of schools as opposed to the countryside schools, and so it was sent back, and so they are supposed to reconsider it again and present it. And so when you look at the cost of the fees, I think that it's a balance. We demand for quality education, but also sometimes that comes at a cost. But also there is, in terms of affordability, how many parents can afford to pay for the children's fees? Especially if you move to the up country, many people are struggling not just with education. There are many other challenges that you face. So you are cut across. The aspects to do with gender, you're very good at gender. Many cultures still seems to be pushing towards the boy child as opposed to. And so it's a whole conversation. But also, just as to mention, is that we have to continue demanding for better financing of the education, but also there has to be control in terms of the fees. Otherwise, many people will be thrown off the bar that has been set.
And then maybe also to bring Harris in, the teachers defied the cap on not increasing the school fees, and their argument was the private system of education is the only locally, invested in entity. And they're like, in as much as they would have wanted free land from government, it has never happened that them as local investors have been given any free tokens within the system. And the other argument they gave was that, and then they literally, you hire local. Like the people that work in these schools are Ugandans. And so rightly so, the system of the private schools is that it sustains itself on the money that comes in from the students. And so to tell them not to increase is to imagine that their businesses as private schools didn't have any problems within the 2 years of the pandemic and are not feeling the pinch of the fluctuating prices of commodities. Is it possible that in liberalizing our education system, we created a loophole in providing education for all?
Yeah, thank you, Trish. You know, education is so critical to any society. Actually, there is an author, one writer, I don't know if it's Nelson Mandela or someone else, but he said that there is no country or nation which can be better than the quality of its teachers.
Yes.
That's very important. The challenge we have as a nation is that every challenge is politicized. Our government rarely comes out honestly in a comprehensive manner to address some of these challenges. So it's always in a reactionary mood. It is like an absentee landlord. And that's the problem. Well, so on one side, you have parents who are genuinely concerned about the fees, both the tuition and the non-tuition fees that are being charged by schools. Every year there is always an increment. Every year there is an increment. This term increment, the other term an increment. I think that is a cause for concern, and I think it calls for regulation. There is an Education Act, the Pre-Primary, the Primary, and the Primary, Post-Primary Act, which regulates education in Uganda. And among others, it regulates the school fees and provides that before a board, because in governance structure of schools, there is a board of governors. And this board is the one which is in charge of levying school fees. And these school fees are supposed to be approved by the Ministry of Education and Sports before they actually can take effect. So when you go on the ground, you find that actually schools have been increasing fees without approval
from the boards. Interesting.
So that is one problem. Problem number two is the issue of social harmony that is brought about by inequality in access to education. Because the primary cause of inequality later on in social spheres of our society is education. If a child goes to King's College Budo, to Nabisunsa, there are about 6 schools that the committee actually is concerned with. Yes, there are 6 schools.
And these are big traditional schools.
Yeah, the big traditional schools. You know, when Sarah opened Honorable in early February, in early 2022, said there's a problem with exorbitant fees charged by government-aided schools. They weren't meaning all these other Kwara schools. They were actually meaning these top schools where the top crop, the elites.
Did they look at my school?
No, they didn't. Which one is your school? No, your school is not a concern. So they looked. Oh, they didn't look at it, but they ordered them to look at it. Yes. So they looked at King's College Budo, Nabisunsa, Gayaza Girls, then there is Chibuli and Kawempe Muslim, and another school I forget. So these are schools which are either within or around Kampala. Yes. And when you look at these schools, they are the schools that the ruling class and the successful business community and a few elites take their schools. Yes. Outside that, no. Even if you're government aided, you're not a serious concern. So that's one. Then you have private schools on the other side, which are also under the policy of liberalization of education, opening up, saying, no, we determine our quality and we charge fees depending on our quality. So there is all these issues that need to be addressed in a coherent manner through a well-researched policy. And I agree with Parliament, because I think the Deputy Speaker yesterday guided that there should be a comprehensive report by the Parliamentary Committee on Education for Parliament to be properly guided on what should be done. My opinion is that we need a genuine conversation on funding of education, on funding of healthcare access. We should, as a nation, be concerned on whether there is a great school in every district, or at least in every region. Because schools matter. They directly speak to the productivity of your human resource. They directly speak to the productivity of your country, the GDP. So they matter, and as government, the government should be concerned, and as a whole, as the country as a whole, we must be concerned on the funding of these schools. And even these other government schools we are talking about, which are outside the big six, capitation grant only 10,000. So even when government introduced the UPE and UCE, they're only putting 10,000. Now what's 10,000?
And they also scrapped the milk policy.
10,000. So I think that these are some of the non-negotiables. And I keep talking about non-negotiables. For me, these non-negotiables that we need a consensus about as a country, as the heart, that the engine of the country. We may disagree on other things, but the question of access to quality education for every child of this nation is a non-negotiable. Access to quality health care for every citizen of this nation is a non-negotiable. And all taxpayers must be willing, just like the British have done with their national health service system, whether rich or poor, the quality of health care you afford, you get, is not determined by your social status. You will, in England, get the same quality of health care as the richest man in that country. And that's why we need to move as a nation. Similarly, we cannot be educating some children, giving them good education, and others close to no education at all. No wonder the dropout rates are increasing. Yeah, so for me, this is a big conversation that Parliament shouldn't handle in a piecemeal manner.
And when you say that, I was trying to understand, the context of it. And I realized in 2014, this very conversation on fees was happening. And still, the stance of the private entities was that we are not going to take the directive. But that notwithstanding, my problem, and most probably also my concern, is school is resuming this very week. I think on the 6th, school will resume. And the applications for senior ones are going in. And if you decide on any other entity or any private school you decide to apply to, you might have to pay a 50,000, a 50,000 fee for an application. And if you have 800 students applying to that school, the maths around there would be that the school will make a lot of money just from applications. The lack of, and because there is an Education Act, I worry. The lack of regulation when it comes to the education sector, in running it, but also in holding private entities to account, because it shouldn't be that the disparity in getting a good education is who has more money than the other, but that, like Harrison said, that it's education for all, and not just education of UPE and youth, but quality education. So how do we create a link in regulation and managing the money aspect in these schools?
It's a challenge because of the resource envelopes. It's the education as a matter of policy, and which has consistently appeared in our manifesto, is that we want the best for our children. The president the other time in 26th in that that district
Liberation
of the
Day.
Prime Minister,
Kakumiro.
he made reference to this and he insisted. You could see that he was very concerned. But what I know is that hampers investment in education is the resource envelope. Of course, at one time, World Bank, IMF came up with this policy, that's what led to privatization of education that reduced cost in social expenditure, meaning reduced cost in health, reduced cost in education, that's why you see even in health, all of a sudden, multiple hospitals came up, pharmacists came up, clinics and laboratories, because it was a deliberate move by World Bank to stop government. It's everybody's view, because they are school of thought which think that there are things that we shouldn't have completely given up. I mean, we are still crying today about even mere commercial bank. Or some people feel that there's such public good that you don't need to divest yourself from, including electricity. But here is what it was. We came up into that. We thought they meant well for us. We swallowed it. But that is now why you see, over time, the effect was felt in that government expenditures, investment in social infrastructure was reduced. Health, very notable, and education, very notable. However, government came up with USC and UCE and USC from down up, in that it still calls for investment, because it's considerable amount of money. Even if you decide, for example, that you're going to give a half a liter of milk per day, just a half, or even a quarter liter.
Well, I heard they're going to remove the milk policy.
If you calculate it, you find the whole thing is swallowing all the revenues, all the taxes. So the goodwill is there, but the resources is a problem. Even a quarter liter of milk, if you decide that today we're going to give a quarter liter per child per school in the whole country, you see what it is. So the goodwill is there and the resources. So when it comes to now controlling the fees itself, first of all, even in government-headed school fees, we have schools, we have had the problem of what you call hidden cost. There's several hidden costs there. Cost for this and this include so many things. Of course, we all know that historically, government would provide even pencils, even books, even uniforms, even shoes. But now, all these items are compiled in hidden cost. Even if we prohibit the explicit increase in the fees, first of all, the government capitation would appear very, very small. Two, the hidden cost will come in. So that is why the enforceability is difficult. And this happens in all laws. Once you pass a legislation which conflicts with the economic status, you will most likely have an idle and redundant law, irrespective whether in school or what. I mean, we had the Nguli Act, or we still have Nguli Act in the status
It is
book,
actually being debated in Parliament.
People can't afford whiskey and wine. So what do you have to do? Even in police barracks, they'll be selling. So in principle, how do we now operate in the face of legislations as such, or even policies as such, vis-a-vis the resource capacity or the economic capacity? Do you end up having laws which are very difficult to police, even if you deploy police? So we just hope that our petroleum will come out soon, and therefore maybe we shall be more empowered and put more investment in social infrastructure against the advice of World Bank and IMF. But even before that, all attempts are being made to struggle within our limits of resource and funding to ensure that this fees is regulated so that everybody else can afford. It is the dream and the wish of government and NRM as a party that affordable and quality education is brought. But how we measure our wish with the resources is another thing.
And indeed, because I'm still struggling with UPE and USC, because whereas the faith of those two entities is there, the quality of the students that come out of those schools is very problematic. You cannot have a conversation in English with a child that has gone through the UPE system of this country. And because even the quality of the teachers that are there, but also even the investments made in the schools that are present in those schools. And I've been as far as Iganga, and I've looked at the government-aided schools in those places, and you know for a fact that there is a disparity between the children in Iganga and the children in town. But I've also been to Kawempe Muslim. I'll give an example to Kawempe Muslim. And just the presentation of a child coming to school, what they look like, whether they ate, their presence in school is questionable. And this child has showed up because most probably school offers posho and porridge, and that is the only thing they are taking from a collective education as UPE. And so, whereas you speak to, resource mobilization and reimbursement, it will be very problematic to look at a 50 trillion budget and realize that education got the bare bone budget for this financial year. And the work that they will have to use for that will most probably to be paying the teachers. So, and that is where I maybe, Kimonges, you help us in the reality of issues and the wishes of a manifesto of the NRM government. We cannot, push the children into the system of UPE and use and imagine that they will come out right if a budget like that is passed today doesn't answer the questions of education.
So I want to agree with Afanda, which that our resource envelope really is small, but also it's where we find ourselves. In a proposed budget that is currently being considered, we have a budget of close to 49.9, approximately
Let's say
50 trillion. Of that, a very huge chunk of it goes towards payment of debt. But I must say that notwithstanding the circumstances we find ourselves, we have to choose our priorities right.
Exactly.
We have to choose our priority right. Aris mentions of access to education, health. This week you've seen the back and forth engagements between the Minister of Health and Minister of Finance.
There is no medicine. There's not been medicine in hospitals since October.
You've seen, actually, I was seeing images on one of the media stations of people have resorted to, I think, is it local hubs?
Yes.
I could see some very, very not very interesting images. It's a situation we should never find ourselves in. We have to choose our priority rights. Look at the Auditor General report. How much money goes into corruption? The money that is ideal if we decided to block the leakages and see where to put some of these resources, maybe education, maybe health, and some of the priority areas, we could go far. We find ourselves, it's true that the money that is there available is less, but I think the position would be we have to choose our priorities right. We have an education system where teachers their payment now, the sciences have a bit gone high in terms of their pay. The arts are waiting.
And they're threatening to strike.
And I'm very sure as day turns, even if we got the money from the oil, the probability of us changing or taking towards having our priorities right is very, very unlikely. But kudos to NRM. I think that this seems to be appearing on their manifesto and some of the priorities. But I think how it translates to being actualized is still an issue. Yeah.
And as we wind down, where do we go from here, Harris?
Yeah, but I want to disagree. Well, within the bigger scheme of things, I appreciate that we are a poor country compared to other nations of the world. I do appreciate that. But I don't agree that we are too poor not to afford a certain basic quality of education, a certain basic quality of health care. What I see is a gross mismanagement of resources. If you have a government which budgets for over 1 trillion in terms of travels for its officials, and you have all these corruption scandals, even if you're the richest country on earth, you still will not be able to finance your education with your health care. So we need to diagnose our problem as a country properly and call the kind of disease that we're suffering from its right name, and that is gross mismanagement, gross misadministration. So where do we go from here? I think that for us from the opposition, our belief, and I know that many Ugandans agree with us, without changing the government, you cannot change the tendency, because the attitude of the leadership at the top permeates up the bottom. Even if you're the best child in your family, you have best ideas, but your dad is of the negative attitude, that family cannot go anywhere. The best you can do is to leave the family and go elsewhere or establish your own. Unfortunately, for a country, Uganda, it's the only nation we have. It's the only home we have. So we have to fight so hard to change government, so that we put a responsible government in place, a government that cares for its people, a government that provides health care for its citizens, especially the adult, the elderly. I can assure you that, and the cases of cancer are increasing in this country. You either have a relative or a friend, or you know someone who is a patient of cancer. The cost of treating cancer is so high. We've been talking about pension. Even if you're the highest pensioner in NSSF, you cannot afford the cost of cancer, of treating cancer. And we could learn from Nairobi what our brothers here have done in Kenya. Government now, they have moved in to provide health insurance. All countries also are providing health insurance. But these strategic decisions, to move the country in that strategic direction, you need a responsible government. But a government that we have in the country is one which can no longer hold this together. Its officials are all declared corrupt, and they cannot help themselves to treat that corruption, apart from uprooting all of them and a new breed of leaders installed to provide a new strategic direction. For me, that is the only remedy we have. Even with the oil, forget it. That oil money, people will start traveling to Canada, to USA, taking their girlfriends wherever. It will all be wasted. Actually, when you look at countries with oil, which have mismanaged them like Nigeria and others, they have experienced what the researchers have termed as the resource curse. So without proper resource management, without strong parliamentary oversight, that oil is going to seep through and will not provide education, the good health care we are talking about here.
Yeah. As we wind down, Awich.
Oh yeah, as we wind up, I just like to say that the issue of human rights should be set to rest. We all want respect for human rights as a government, as a ruling party. It is clear in our manifesto under governance. So we do hope that even the conflicting legal interpretation should be sorted out so that we know which way to go. We also expect that investigative machineries and claims that have been brought, both from the he who is alleging and from the recipient end, things should be done. We really need human rights for our people. On education and all this, I like to differ from my brother, young brother here, in that repeatedly the masses want NRM. Article 1 is clear. Power belongs to the people. We have consulted the masses, and we are going to consult them in 2026.
You wouldn't have brought military.
The masses want it. And we are quite confident in the visionary and the clear-headedness of our party chairman, whom we shall continue to front as our flag bearer. We believe that he will achieve his objective. Yeah, the vision which he has been struggling from is school days from Tari school.
Is
where
the
I
only
went to.
vision bearer? You don't
For
have
now,
any other
we have
in
sat as
the
a party.
NRM.
For now, we have
For
sat
40
in
years,
a-
you don't have any
For
other.
now, we have sat as a party in our relevant organs, in our national conference, in our national executive committee, in our central executive committee. We still find him worth. If somebody else comes there after, that is another matter for another day. So, the leadership is in safe hands and with the mandate of the people, but we have to do all that I had said about human rights and other needs of the persons. Because after all that we are saying, I repeated that it must crystallize into the well-being of Uganda. And one aspect that has crystallized into is that we now know Ugandans live longer. The life expectancy has increased and continue to increase.
I hope
and
that is not an achievement of the NRM
not
government.
only do people live longer, but longer and happier. Independent research has proved that in East Africa, we as Uganda still beat in happiness. And we don't do that research. So what else do you, apart from whether you put philosophical jargon, economic, and whatever terms, it must crystallize into longer life expectancy and happiness, which we are seeing.
Interesting. As we wind down.
No, mine is to first of all thank you and thank the panelists for accepting to be part of this conversation. Two is to say that human rights don't have colors, human rights don't have parties, and when it comes to demanding for accountability on the same, there should be unison, demanding for better education, demanding for better health care, respect of human rights. I think that should be our way forward. We should also continue demanding for accountability from Parliament, being a focus on Parliament. I think that the masses should also be able to continuously hold their members of Parliament, hold Parliament itself as an institution accountable.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And did I wind up?
Yes, you did. You
No,
finished.
No, I was responding. Just one
in 1 minute.
Yeah, my concluding remarks. I would like to call upon fellow young people, especially in the NRM, to stand up and speak against the human rights abuses, especially those whose parents, uncles, relatives might be in charge of government. Because sometimes they do these things under the impression, the wrongful impression that they are securing a future for you. I would like to ask you to stand with your generation and say that human rights is a non-negotiable. Whether it is your dad, whether it is your uncle, whether it is your mother who is abusing these human rights, you need to stand up to them and say, this is a non-negotiable for us. In this century, we cannot put up with abductions, with torture, with political persecution. And if we do that, and then we have a responsible government that invests in education, you young people in the NRM, once you have the right education, you don't need anyone to corruptly take monies to buy you a plot of land somewhere. All you need are the skills that allow you to secure your own future. So we need a working healthcare system, a working public transport system, a working education system. Once we have those in place, then every young person in this country who works, who does what they have to do, then they will ultimately succeed. You don't need any parent or any guardian to secure the future for you. We only need systems to secure the future for you and for every other citizen.
That's interesting. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me in this conversation. It had its sticky moments, but I enjoyed the conversation in the end. And to you, our viewer, I hope there was a moment for you. For me, the moment is, if we do not invest constantly in our public service systems, there's going to come a time where we have a very malfunctional systems and like me and you won't be able to function both mentally and both physically. The health minister is advocating for an increment in the budget of UCI, that's the Uganda Cancer Institute. I hope that the parliamentarians in that house will see it fit to be able to increase that budget. because cancer is eating up the society and it is very urgent to address it. Our education system today is one that needs a recheck and a constant overhaul. I hope that's a conversation that we will have. And I hope the curriculum that we have for the senior threes will be something that will, take us into the future of a different country, but also a different education system. Thank you for joining us. We are Focus on Parliament. I'm very happy and glad that you constantly tune in to have these conversations. See you next Saturday. Bye.